I'm happy to introduce our next panel, which is on antibiotic use in Maryland agriculture. So the 2015 Federal Veterinary Directive Feed really changed and codified how farmers use antibiotics in their practice. And earlier this year, Maryland state legislature passed its own antibiotics use bill for agricultural production. So our panelists are here to discuss these two regulations, what they say, what they are, and then how they work together or don't work together, and what this means for Maryland livestock producers. So we'll start with Dr. Michael Radebaugh, who's the Maryland State Veterinarian, and then we'll have Betsy Nicholas, who's the Executive Director of the Waterkeepers Chesapeake and led the Fair Farms campaign to pass this bill. And then we'll have Colby Ferguson, who's the Director of Government Affairs for Maryland Farm Bureau and is also a livestock producer in Western Maryland. And then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions on this really important topic. Okay. So, Dr. Radebaugh, when you're ready.
All right. Good morning. My name is Mike Radebaugh. I'm the Maryland State Veterinarian, and our job is to get you to lunch. So we'll do that. But this is a very important issue, and hope we have a good panel discussion. First of all, I'm speaking to give you a perspective on where we are now and where we've been with minimizing antibiotic resistance in food-producing animals. I will talk about that and the timeline. And also I'll give you 5 keys of how to write a valid VFD or veterinary feed director and a RX type script for water-soluble antimicrobials. And then Betsy I'll talk a little bit about our where we are now and where with the Keep Antibiotics Effective Act of 2017, our responsibility with that, and then Betsy will follow in with that, and then Colby will give us his perspective on as a producer and as official with the Maryland Farm Bureau. So get going here. Here's the timeline. Back in the mid 1990s. Antibiotic resistance was getting to be a real concern, not just here in Maryland, but also nationally and actually really even globally. So at that particular time, the FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, set up with CDC a national antimicrobial antibiotic monitoring system, or the NARMS. And in that system, they were looking at antibiotics usage in 4 different bacteria: Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, and Enterococcus. And to see how the antibiotics that were being used were causing any antimicrobial resistance in those 4 bacteria groups. At the same time, in those 1990s time, the FDA set up a working group with scientists in antibiotic resistance, with officials from CDC, USDA, FDA, and also with officials from the American Veterinary Medical Association and with industry to look for ways, policies, guidelines, and then laws to minimize antibiotic resistance. And then the first thing that they worked on was guidance for industry 152. And basically what this guidance was, this first start categorizing antimicrobials as both critically important, highly important, and then also to qualitative them as far as their ability to cause antibiotic resistance from being from high, medium to low. So this was the beginning of setting up what antibiotics are important both in humans and in animals. So the FDA from there on not just looked at a food-producing antimicrobial drug as making it safe and effective for animals. They also looked at it from now on to how it would be safe for humans. So following up on that and guidance for Industry 209 was set the framework for establishing judicious use of antibiotics. It mentioned that production antimicrobials would be eventually done away with, and also started to talk about veterinary oversight. And then in 2010, with guidance for Industry 209, that's where the antibiotics were eventually looked at it for that framework. And then in 2013, excuse me, I missed that one. 2013 is when we really started to look at setting up a time frame, a 3-year time frame to convert medically important antibiotics into the law that they would be used for treatment, control, and prevention. Production type antimicrobials would be done away with. It gave the drug sponsors 3 years to develop, turn these antibiotics from over-the-counter type antibiotics, antimicrobials, to either use the VFD, which is for Veterinary Feed Directive, which would be used in feed, or in water-soluble antibiotics for food-producing animals is the RX. So at that 3-year period, the drug sponsors had to change their labels to convert to these types of drug usages for the medically important antibiotics, which are medically important antibiotics, or antibiotics that are important in humans. And then as January 1st, 2017, it became law. The 21 CFR Part 558 became law that from now on, any of the medically important antimicrobials had to be either used as a VFD drug or a RX drug. So some key points. There's 5 key points for writing a valid VFD and an RX. The first is these 3 groups have to be involved: the veterinarian, the producer, and the distributor. And the veterinarian is the person that is atop of that triangle and is most important because that veterinarian is the one that's writing these drug orders. Number 2, the veterinarian must develop a relationship with the producer, and it's called a veterinary client-patient relationship, or VCPR. And with that, to become a valid relationship, the veterinarian must be responsible for that particular farm. He or she must take on the responsibility for that farm. And the veterinarian must have sufficient knowledge of that farm. All the production types and what's going on in that farm as far as their sanitation, biosecurity, and preventative medicines and treatments. And then also the veterinarian must be visiting this farm so he knows exactly what's going on at that farm. And then the veterinarian should be available. If there's any adverse reactions or if there's any problems, the veterinarian should be available to respond to that particular producer. Number three, the distributor has a one-time notification to the FDA CVM, where that must notifies them that they are a distributor. And as you can see, initially there was just a few, like in December 2015, it was only 4 that signed up. And then in the middle of 2016 or so, there was 30. And by the time that the law became in effect as of January 1st, 2017, we have 59 distributors throughout the state that are available to handle these particular antimicrobials and mix them and provide them to the producers. What are the producer's requirements? The producer must call the veterinarian and for the veterinarian to write the VFD or the RX drug order. And there's no extra label use. The whatever is on the label for that particular antimicrobial, medically important antimicrobial has to be followed. There's no extra label use. So whatever the drug dosage, the indication, the duration, and expiration must be followed. And there's no refills. There's the label has to be followed. The duration and expiration has to be followed, as I said. And if the expiration date is up, which the maximum is 6 months for expiration dates, but a lot of the antimicrobials are less than that. They have to be followed. If the expiration date expires, then a new VFD or RX has to be filled out. Both the veterinarian, the producer, and distributor must maintain these orders for 2 years, as for the VFD, and then for the RX or water-soluble orders, they have to be maintained for 5 years according to our pharmacy laws. Good information is found through the FDA, their website, and with our website. This information that through town hall meetings and meeting with veterinarians and groups, we have gotten out last year and the year before, actually, to tell the producers and veterinarians and distributors that this is coming. And so these are good references. That guidance 233 is a good example shows the good examples of how to make up these RXs and VFDs. The templates are there, and a good question and answer part. The final reference, the drug sponsors and FDA did not take in consideration minor species on writing up these labels, especially for bees and for fish, aquaculture. So the FDA is allowing those particular antibiotics, which is mostly tetracycline. Oxytetracycline is used in these two species that the extra label use can be used for that. The AVMA has had a lot of trainings to familiarize veterinarians about learning about bees and about marking aquaculture, all those different types of things that could be the aquaculture, that are looking for. Now, as far as the Keep Antibiotic Effective Act of 2017, that went into effect as of October 1st of this year. The General Assembly passed this law back last winter, and just now became effective. And as of January 1st, 2017, the Maryland Department of Agriculture is responsible for collecting data from national sources, from trade sources on antimicrobial usage in livestock, in cattle, swine, and also in poultry. The first report is due to the General Assembly in December of 2019. This law exempts the small producers, and if you sell over under 200 pigs and 200 cattle, you're exempt from this law. And if you sell under 60,000 birds, then you're exempt from this law. We have set up a working group starting to look at ways that we can collect this data in our animal health program. And also we're looking at regulations to codify the administrative penalties in a better way, and also for our veterinarians to understand and define what is meant for using antibiotics for prophylactic or preventive use in a regular pattern. So we want to define that. It's not a term that veterinarians use very much. From what the authors were concerned about is repetitive use of antimicrobials in a preventive or prophylactic way. And so we want to make sure that we define that properly so that it's that the regular pattern is used appropriately. They're concerned about, we would the veterinarians and the producers would start using it more as a production type antimicrobial, which is now banned. You cannot use antimicrobials, for medically important antimicrobials, for production use, weight gain and feed efficiency and so forth. So there are things that we're working on as far as regulations in our Code of Maryland Agriculture regulations. So if there's any questions or anything, I'll be glad to answer. You call me, and here's my contact information, and then we'll move on to Betsy. Here you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Dr. Radebaugh gave you the big picture on all of this and talked about the federal law, which is really a great step forward in addressing the problems of antibiotic resistance. And I want to go into a little more detail on what we just passed this past year in Maryland with the Keep Antibiotics Effective Act. So just to give you sort of the big picture of why are we talking about all of this boring stuff. I've got my cheat sheet in front of me. Okay, 2 million people, 23,000 people, and $55 billion. That's what we're dealing with in terms of looking at the problem of antibiotic resistance and the medical issues and costs associated with it. 2 million people every year contract antibiotic-resistant infections. 23,000 people die as a result of these infections, and there's $55 billion in costs associated with this. Now, this is not solely an agricultural problem by any means, but the agricultural industry is using a lot of antibiotics, and so decreasing that use helps to address this public health threat and this public health problem. And very specifically, as Dr. Radebaugh was talking about, the focus is very much directed on what are considered the medically important antibiotics, which are the ones that are used for humans. Because that's really the basis for why we're looking at this, is the concern about the public health threat of antibiotic resistance. So this is just the details of the law so that I had it in front of me in case anybody asked me any questions and I didn't mess up the details. So as we discussed already, there are a couple details here that add additions beyond what was included in the federal law. And specifically, it's the limitation on prophylaxis to address the elevated risk of contraction of a particular disease or infection. And those are the things that we think need some regulations, and that the department is looking to define those terms so that producers have an understanding of what those situations are. You can continue to use antibiotics in livestock production in Maryland. It does not prohibit that, but it's for sick animals. The law really is targeting this issue, as Dr. Radebaugh was talking about, for the preventative uses. That you don't want people to be using antibiotics on animals that are not sick. And that's really what these regulations, both the federal and the state, are trying to get at, limiting those uses, limiting the overuse of antibiotics. So that's what we're really trying to get at. The promoting weight gain and improving feed efficiency were both already addressed in the federal law, so they're pretty much just restated in the Maryland law, which is great to have if for some reason federal law gets rolled back. The other aspect is, on disease control, as I already mentioned, we're really looking at, through the, for confined animal feeding operations, it's the exposure of animals to other animals, and moving within the barn units and housing units that you have to have a concern about. I already mentioned medically important is human, and that's really what we're looking at, is those drugs that are gonna have an impact on humans. That's what we're trying to limit the exposure on. Dr. Radebaugh already talked about the limitations here, so I'll skip that. So what we're hoping for from Maryland Department of Agriculture is some clarification on what the additional aspects are for the Maryland law, that we need to address this issue of what is a heightened risk where there can be a prescription from a veterinarian for use of antibiotics in Maryland for animals, and also what are the circumstances in which something would be considered a regular pattern of use and it would not be appropriate to be issuing those veterinary directives or having the use. So the regular pattern is something that we think that needs to be defined by regulation, and would be very helpful to get some stakeholder input. That would be our recommendation. And our understanding is that that Dr. Radebaugh and the department are working on that right now to get a better definition of what that is and help define, for example, if that's going to be inoculating all eggs for chickens that are born, or the sort of making sure that things like weight gain and stuff are already excluded, but certain activities that are just regular on farms, like repeatedly moving dairy cows or other sort of activities that are very normal and happen all the time. We want to make sure that these aren't being used like saying, I'm going on an airplane, so I'm going to be exposed to new people, and so give me antibiotics. We're trying to do the same thing at the animal level and say that you can't just overexpose animals to these antibiotics all the time because they are going to create this antibiotic resistance problem. There has to be a special need or a special occurrence. Now, if the situation is that herd or that flock has been exposed to something, then that would fit within the heightened risk where the animals have been exposed, and it would be appropriate for the antibiotics to be prescribed, even for the entire group or even for prophylactic use to keep them from getting sick. So that's what we're hoping we can get some clarification on, and that will be really helpful for all the practitioners out there. In Maryland, we already have many folks. I think they're actually, most of the major producers are not using antibiotics in a regular pattern of use. So in Maryland, I think that there are probably a smaller impact than in a lot of other states in actually putting this into effect, but getting that clarification is really going to help with make sure there aren't any misunderstandings of what's expected, what kind of activities are in or out, and how to move forward on implementing these laws and protecting public health in the best way possible. So that's it.
All right, I guess I'm up next, and I'm going to try to go through a couple of slides pretty quickly and see if maybe do some discussion on maybe some of the misconceptions or some of the things that are out there. The first slide that I have up here is one that we put together for our members initially, so they could kind of understand the comparison of the federal law or the federal rule that was going into place as of January 1, 2017, and then the California law that was actually passed in 2015 prior to the federal rule, and then the Maryland law that was Senate Bill 422 that actually passed this past session. So as you can see, the yeses down through there and the no's, you can see that the law pretty much conforms, both the California law, the Maryland law, and the federal law pretty much conform together. And that was kind of the whole purpose of the California law, was to make sure the federal rule went into place as they were trying to say, as they wanted it to come. So that's why the federal rule looks the way that it does, because the California law was put in place prior to, and so a lot of the changes at the last, as they were moving forward, made sure that the federal rule, as it went into place in 2017, conformed to this, very similar to the information that the California law. And you can see down there at the bottom, the last one about the mandating the prescriptions. There's a yes at California and a no for the other two, and in the fine print down below there, I kind of explained that. The yes for California law is it doesn't go into effect until January 1 of 2018, but it also cannot duplicate what the NOMS and the NARMS recording process is, which that was what they wanted to do, is to make sure that NARMS and NOMS was put in place to verify, because just because I have farmers report how much antibiotics that they use, whether it be in their feed or with injectable or something like that, doesn't necessarily correlate to any kind of antibiotic resistance. And so the only way to really correlate the two together is to also go and actually take tissue tests at the processing facility, at the animal processing facility, as well as take tissue tests at the point of sale, or at the grocery store. And so FDA is actually in charge of doing those two components. So if you dig into the NARMS, the National Animal Health, it's down there at the bottom, the Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, that component is a three-legged stool, which is how much is being used, versus how much exposure is being found in the processing facility versus how much is actually being found at the grocery store at the point of sale. And that's how you can really accurately determine whether there is antibiotic resistance being created, and then source it back to where that location to look if there is an overuse or a misuse of antibiotics, which that is the most accurate way of going about doing that. So that's kind of to understand the whole why maybe we're more resistant of just gathering usage data, because it doesn't necessarily give you any correlation to any kind of antibiotic resistance. So the next sections I want to go into is another misconception, because another one that's thrown out there is that 70% of all the antibiotics used in the country are used on animals. And the definition of antibiotics is anything that's both human and non-human use. So when you compare the two, so this slide compares animal, or this is human use. So this is the antibiotics we use on a daily basis when we go to the doctor for whatever use that we have it for. You know, some sort of bacterial infection, whether we have a surgery, and all the things down through the list there. And so, as you can see, there's quite a few of them there. Penicillins makes up one of the highest ones. The cephalosporins, sulfamides, and quinolins, those are the main ones. So if you add those up, about 85% fall within those, the blue, the kind of burgundy, the tan, and the purple. And so that's the kind of remember those names there as we look at, and I'll flip back and forth here so you can see it. But that's the use of humans, in humans. Now if we switch to, and these colors are all still the same, so it's not like I changed colors, but I want you to look at, when you compare, penicillins was blue, cephalosporins was the burgundy, tan, purple, and we switched to animals. The tetracycline is a different purple. You know, the tetracycline is the one up there at 4% in humans, but in livestock it makes up 43%, and that is obviously what we consider a medically important antibiotic, and it falls under the new rule. Ionophores, 29% yellow. If you look in humans, it's not there because it's not a medically important antibiotic. It's not used in humans. It doesn't work really in humans because we're a simple stomach. We're a monogastric. We don't have a rumen, so we don't eat hay and things like that. And that's the main thing that ionophores do, is it helps with gut health, particularly in ruminants, and it also shows some viability in poultry. So as you can see, our main things, NIR, I had to look that up earlier because I couldn't remember what NIR is. That's not independently reported. It's not a specific drug. It's actually, I wrote them all down. They're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 9 different drugs that fall into those. Those are very minor used drugs, and all but one of them are not used in feeds. Only one's used in feed. But as you can see, penicillin is there at 7%, and then microlids is at 4%, sulfamides is at 4%. So what is that, about 15% is the main ones that if you get into humans, or if you go back to the human side, the ones that we use quite a bit don't make up much of the livestock. So when you hear the 70% of antibiotics used in livestock, you also got to remember we grow there's 330 some odd million people in the United States. You know, we grow 300 million chickens in Maryland. So if you start to think, obviously one chicken doesn't equal a human, but and you also got to remember that their lifespan is much different as well. So that's kind of a colorful one. I think this one probably makes it a little more self-explanatory. The blue line, the blue bars are human use. The red bars are animal use. So you can see penicillin's the first one there. We use about 6%, 7% of all the antibiotics. This is not just feed. This is injectables. This is water soluble. This is everything. About 6% of our use is in penicillins, which makes up 44% of humans. But 43% of tetracyclines is what we mainly use, which is the primary feed source. Tetracyclines, core tetracycline, is one of the main ones used in feed. As you can see, it makes up about 4% of human use. And the common human use is acne cream, mainly. And it also does some for sexually transmitted diseases and things like that, but I won't get any farther than that. Ionophores is the number 2 use. What you can see is 0 use in humans. You can see the cephalosporins, the ones for human use. We don't use them at all in livestock, and just kind of goes down through there. So we're talking about a minor portion of the pie when you start to talk about medically important antibiotics used in livestock versus in humans. And so when you think about the whole gamut of and another one I'd like to say is on the ionophore, that one in the United States is defined, the U.S. defines it as an antibiotic. The European Union does not define it as an antibiotic. And so it actually, you can use ionophores in the EU, and it does not issue your antibiotic-free, no antibiotics forever. Same thing goes within our U.S. No antibiotics forever. So think about that. If we took out the 20 some odd percent, almost 30% of ionophores and didn't even clarify them as an antibiotic, which European Union doesn't either, then our numbers would dramatically drop. And so I think that's where I think the misconception comes into. And when you really break down what CDC considers the top 10 antibiotic-resistant bacteria that we're having our problems with, only 3 of the top 10 and none of the top 3 have livestock antibiotics being used. So the problem, the kingpin problem, and as I continue to tell everybody, the problem is the big gorilla in the room, and we're trying to fix things on the side instead of trying to combat the major thing, which is the misuse and overuse of antibiotics in humans, which is where we really need to be addressing. So, I mean, I would say as a livestock producer myself, you can see antibiotic resistance in your herd if you use the same thing over and over. And so the ability to make sure that you're not building up resistance within your herd, within the ground and the soil that your animals are growing in, you have to be smart. You can't overuse it and you can't misuse it. And I think that's where the good stewards of animal husbandry come into place. And quite frankly, you go out of business if all of a sudden you get a resistance in a bacteria, because it will kill them in a heartbeat. So I'll stop there to give us a little bit of time to discuss, but or answer any questions.
All right, thank you to the panel. And do we have questions about the room?
Good morning, Kate Masterton, lawyer, farmer, Farm Bureau member at Colby.
Hi.
I'm curious about the genesis of the Maryland law because it duplicates almost exactly federal regulations that already are burdensome to farmers. And perhaps, Colby, you can speak to that, because I can't imagine Farm Bureau was necessarily in favor of the duplicative legislation. Thank you.
Yeah, we opposed the bill in its original form when it came in. We opposed the bill for 3 years. This was the 3rd year that it was in, and it kind of morphed as things moved along within the federal rule. And our major thing is that we actually had, prior to the first two bills, it was we want to make sure that the federal rule isn't pulled back, that it's not a voluntary thing. And we're like, this is not voluntary. It's only voluntary part of it is that you've got 3 years to put it in place instead of tomorrow. And so that was the only voluntary portion of it. The rule was going in place in 2017, whether you wanted to go in kicking and screaming or you wanted to take the time to be able to implement it properly. So the first 2 times around, that's where we addressed. The 3rd time around was the bill this past session, and it went over and above the federal rule and really got into a lot of opinion-based and really started to become anti-animal husbandry, and was going to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to administer proper maintenance to the animals, whether you're small or large, really. I'm a very small-scale operation, and the original bill would have been very difficult on myself, even though there was the exemptions in there.
So we are just at time. If it's a short question, we can do it. If not, everyone will give me harsh looks about keeping them from lunch. So.
Adel Shir Mohammadi, College of Ag and Natural Resources, University of Maryland. My question is that there's research now for alternate natural substitutes for antibacterial, such as erythromycin that is used in poultry for weight increase and as a growth hormone almost. So are there any legal aspects being discussed and so forth for those alternate natural compounds?
As far as you say legal?
Were there legal impediments to the
Alternatives. I would say, I think, ionophores, those kinds of components are the ones that, and then you also have some of the, what we call probiotics that we use, Activia and things like that in humans, where you take and it's supposed to clean out your gut and things like that. Those probiotics are also available in livestock and are starting to become more commonly used. A lot of yeast-based probiotics or antimicrobials that are not that are not used in humans are starting to become more. I know in my own operation, we completely removed the use of any medically important antibiotics in feed. I still will use an antibiotic, usually a broad spectrum antibiotic if I get respiratory issues with a sick pig or something like that. But we were actually able, because of the federal rule, which that's why I always say that the federal rule, even though it's very difficult on the farmer to kind of react to, but having it done on a federal basis was absolutely paramount to someone like myself being able to comply, because Maryland is a very small state. We don't have a lot of livestock in the state, and so a lot of the times the feed manufacturers, particularly for the small scale producer, is not actually made in Maryland. It's made in Pennsylvania, it's made in Ohio, it's made in Virginia. And if Maryland, or if Pennsylvania and Ohio and Virginia don't have the same rule as Maryland, they're not required to make the feed the way that I want to, unless I want to take a minimum amount, which is usually 3 tons at a time. And I might not use 3 tons in 5 years, much less 3 tons at one time. So having the federal rule go into place, which did remove those for non-medically important reasons, such as treating for sickness and things like that, it did give me another alternative, which I didn't have before. So as far as a small producer goes, I applaud I do believe we had overuse and misuse within the livestock industry, and I believe this federal rule is addressing that.
Other things too are, there's certain chemicals, chlorine in the water is helpful. The vaccines are being made available for different diseases to prevent those diseases. There are researchers looking into the microbiome. I think when they understand that, they'll see how the commensal bacteria that are involved there and with the pathogenic bacteria are also very important. So there could be some new ideas there, and developing ways to increase those commensal bacteria to fight off infections. So there's a lot of stuff coming out, and I look forward to the future.
Thank you once again to the panel.